Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a deeply fascinating and, honestly, totally relatable cognitive behavior that almost everyone does, but we kind of never talk about openly. We're looking at the science of speaking out loud to yourself. We're not just skimming the surface here. We're going to look specifically at the neurological reality of what literally happens in your brain when you verbalize your thoughts. We'll get into the neural pathways, how auditory feedback loops completely change your cognitive load, and the direct link between your prefrontal cortex and your amygdala during these moments. By the end of this, you're going to understand exactly how this biological quirk is actually a high-level cognitive tool.
So, be honest. Do you ever catch yourself talking out loud to an empty room? Maybe you're trying to figure out a really complex problem, or frantically looking for your keys, and you momentarily stop and think, wait, is this weird? There's definitely this lingering unspoken stigma in our culture that talking to yourself means you're losing it. I mean, we've all done that instinctual look over our shoulder to make sure nobody caught us in the act, right? But developmental psychologists, going way back to pioneers like Lev Vygotsky, have known for a long time that our internal monologue actually starts out as out loud speech. When we're kids, we constantly narrate what we're doing just to figure out the world. Over time, that speech simply internalizes, but the mechanism itself, it literally never goes away.
Far from being some bizarre quirk, it turns out this behavior is a profound evolutionary feature. It is completely normal. Your brain is essentially this incredibly advanced prediction engine, and when it runs into complex, novel problems, just relying on silent internal computation isn't always the fastest or most efficient route. So the really crucial takeaway here is that falling back on out-loud speech is an active strategy your brain uses to recruit extra neural resources. You're not experiencing a hardware glitch. You're actually using an ancient, highly evolved method of externalizing your thoughts. You're leveraging an auditory feedback loop to give your brain a backup way to process information that's just way too messy to juggle in silence.
Okay, let's dive into this and look at the actual cognitive mechanics. Self-talk isn't a glitch. It's a highly functional, built-in tool for your brain designed specifically to take messy internal thoughts and process them more clearly. To get why we even need this, we have to look at the limits of our working memory. Think of your working memory as your brain's mental scratch pad. It has a super limited capacity. It can really only hold a handful of abstract items at any given moment. So when you're trying to solve a tough problem, that scratch pad fills up fast, creating what psychologists call a high cognitive load. By speaking your thoughts out loud, you're literally using the physical airwaves and your own ears as an external hard drive. You're offloading that cognitive burden so your working memory is actually free to solve the problem.
And that offloading process creates a massive transformation. Just think about what a thought is like when it stays completely inside your head. Internal thoughts all sort of exist at the exact same time. They're abstract, they're constantly overlapping, bouncing off each other in this chaotic, non-linear web. But the very second you decide to speak, you're forced to push that abstract chaos through the physical bottleneck of language. You actually have to pick out verbs and nouns and put them in a specific sequence. This physically fires up your motor cortex to form the words and your auditory processing centers to hear them. By verbalizing, you force those messy thoughts to become linear, sequential, and tangible. You're effectively slamming the brakes on your thought process just enough to match the speed of your speech. And that, right there, that grants you the neural bandwidth to actually organize and analyze what's going on.
Now, that structural clarity is absolutely fantastic for untangling everyday, logistical problems. But things get really profound when we look at how the brain processes acute stress. When things get tough and the pressure is on, that messy internal web of thoughts can very quickly trigger your amygdala, which is basically your brain's alarm system, its threat detection center. This leads straight to overwhelming anxiety and that classic fight-or-flight response. But here is the fascinating part. Neuroscientists have found that the simple act of putting your feelings into words, a concept called affect labeling, directly activates your prefrontal cortex. And when your prefrontal cortex gets engaged through language, it literally sends inhibitory signals straight down to the amygdala, biologically dampening your stress response.
Let's map out how this builds into a practical, real-world coping mechanism. Imagine a scenario where a massive project you're managing suddenly just goes completely off the rails. The stress hits, and that internal panic immediately starts spiraling as your amygdala fires up. If you just sit there in silence, that panic almost always compounds, right? But the very moment you start speaking aloud, saying something like, okay, first I need to email the team, then I'm going to adjust the timeline, you interrupt the spiral. By forcing that huge, overwhelming emotion through the linguistic bottleneck we just talked about, you're shifting the heavy cognitive lifting away from the emotional centers of your brain and pushing it straight into your logical, executive functioning centers. You are actively, biologically talking yourself down into a state of emotional regulation.
What's truly incredible here is how this completely redefines your own vocal cords. The source material actually crowns your own voice as an emotional support system. And psychological research, specifically the work by Ethan Kross on psychological distance, shows that how we speak to ourselves matters immensely. When people use their own name or the pronoun you while talking out loud during a stressful event, they activate the exact same neural pathways that light up when they're getting comfort and advice from a trusted friend. Think about that for a second. You don't always need an external peer to help you regulate. You already possess the biological hardware to create psychological distance, comfort yourself, and actually lower your own cortisol levels, simply by using your voice.
So, knowing all this, understanding the cognitive offloading and that amazing amygdala downregulation, I want to leave you with a challenge. How will you utilize your built-in emotional support system the next time you face a high-stress moment? The next time you feel your working memory maxing out or your anxiety starting to spike, don't just keep it locked in the silent echo chamber of your mind. Speak it out loud. Force the abstract to become linear. Use your own voice to clear out the cognitive mess, regulate your nervous system, and actively support yourself. It's a brilliant, scientifically backed tool, and you literally carry it with you everywhere. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I'll catch you next time.